From the head surgery scene in Judgment Day to making the hobbits appear shorter in the Lord of the Rings franchise, here are some movie scenes you probably thought were CGI'd but were completely real. Let's start off with Sarah Connor performing surgery on the Terminator's head in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. You see, filmmakers have a special problem with scenes that involve reflections. The main concern is how to hide the camera when you're trying to film what's happening in the mirror. Most of the time, the answer is to just get rid of the mirror. Then position the actors on the other side of where the glass would be. But that's not what happened in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. While James Cameron's sequel had a lot of great special effects for its time, one of its most interesting scenes was shot with skilled camera tricks instead of expensive CGI. In a deleted scene, we can see Sarah Connor fixing something inside the Terminator's head. In the mirror, she can be seen clearly while she's in the center with her wrist inside the cyborg's head.
Rotate the two locking cylinders counterclockwise.
So how did they do it without the camera showing up in the reflection? Well, it turns out that Linda Hamilton has an identical twin sister, and she's the one playing Sarah Connor in the foreground, imitating her sister's moves on a prop of Arnie's head and shoulders. That was fascinating, but they obviously couldn't do the same for BB-8 in The Force Awakens. Even though it doesn't look like it on camera, BB-8 is a real model that's controlled by puppeteers. The only thing CGI was used for was to remove the puppeteers controlling the droid's movement. While CGI is usually condemned for taking away from the movie itself, its use in The Force Awakens didn't hurt the character in any way. In fact, in this case, the CGI helped because it gave the droid's moves more personality. Of course, using puppeteers while traveling the country for press events wasn't going to work, so there is a fully working robot version of BB-8 that the filmmakers used for press events, which gives the much-loved new droid a realistic look. So how did they come up with the adorable but sleek design? Well, all thanks go to Ralph McQuarrie. His original sketches for R2-D2 were used as a model for BB-8, but of course that doesn't mean that this is the only thing that led to the creation of the droid. In fact, J.J. Abrams made his own simple, clear idea drawing of a ball with a small dome on top, which then became the BB-8 droid. Speaking of droid computers, remember those huge walking machines called Case and TARS in Interstellar? Well, guess what? Those robots were also not made with computer-generated imagery. Christopher Nolan wanted to give those four-sided machines a realistic feel.
Case, go get her.
As if they had their own minds and can make their own choices. To do this, Case and TARS were almost built from scratch and then moved using puppetry. Now that's impressive, but definitely not as impressive as the Amazing Spider-Man films using real web slingers. The people behind the Amazing Spider-Man reboot tried very hard to make it as different as possible from the previous Spider-Man trilogy. And guess what? The web slinging was one department where they took very different approaches. While Sam Raimi used a lot of CGI, the new director Mark Webb wanted to do it with stuntmen instead. Terrified stuntmen, if we're being specific. The effect was made by tying a stuntman, or sometimes even Andrew Garfield, to a wire no thicker than a shoelace 60 feet in the air, which was then linked to a winch on a rail. When they jumped and reached the bottom of their swing, the winch would move down the rail, giving them a nice clean circle and definitely dirty underwear.
Good morning, New Yorkers. Looking for another beautiful day here in the city.
So, that scene where Peter Parker screams while he's learning to swing on a chain probably didn't take much acting. Now, while this may be impressive, this definitely doesn't mean that the first movies didn't have any real effects. Remember when Tobey Maguire caught Mary Jane's lunch like it was nothing? It looks like the kind of scene that should have been shot with special effects. But director Sam Raimi, who made his name with low-budget horror classics like The Evil Dead, has always used real shots whenever possible. Even though the tray in the scene is covered with a strong glue that makes the food stick to it as it falls, it doesn't make the scene any less impressive, especially when you consider that Maguire supposedly had to do over 150 takes to get the shot right. And the result, after seeing something like this, we can really believe that Peter Parker is actually superhuman.
Wow, great reflexes.
thanks.
Now, I know what's going through your mind. The explosion scene in the Paris cafe could not have been done without CGI in Inception. And how can it be? Leonardo DiCaprio and Elliot Page didn't even flinch when the bombs went off. But that's the thing. We are talking about Christopher Nolan here, who mostly prefers real things over CGI. As for the explosion, it was brought to life with air guns, while the scene was shot at 1500 frames per second. This made it look like the explosions were happening slowly, but the actors barely had time to respond. Well, I hope Nolan didn't try to pull anything like this in this year's Oppenheimer. Coming up next, the iconic T-Rex in Jurassic Park. You see, there's a reason why Jurassic Park is the best monster movie of all time. It's not because of the action scenes or the skilled actors, but mainly because the dinosaurs seemed so real. But even though the dinosaurs weren't real, and most of them were made with CGI, it's interesting to note that the Tyrannosaurus Rex wasn't one of them. Even if you don't believe it, the T-Rex was actually a giant moving robot. With the help of Stan Winston Studios, 2 T-Rexes that were as big as people were used, which made every scene with them feel real and totally terrifying. Well, I guess it's no wonder that Jurassic Park won 3 Academy Awards. Practical effects have come a long way, and this definitely reminds me of that scene in Prisoner of Azkaban. Now, the Harry Potter movies didn't always use CGI to make movie magic, but the production team made a real inflatable suit to bring the scene from J.K. Rowling's 3rd Harry Potter book to the big screen. Now, there weren't any CGI effects for this scene, and the production team went to a lot of trouble to make Aunt Marge's change look magical. As for the team, it had 20 people, and it took them 4 months to make something for the actress to wear in the scene. And the suit, well, it had to be made in 3 stages, with limbs that added up to about 50 pounds. Her face, which was made to look like Aunt Marge's, was also made with expandable rubber bladders. The fact that the scene wasn't made with CGI made it even more special for everyone involved. As a result, the people who worked on the movie kept the inflatable suit, and it was displayed at the WB Studio Tour in London. Speaking of practical effects, how can anyone forget what Peter Jackson did with the Hobbits in The Lord of the Rings? One of Peter Jackson's biggest tasks with The Lord of the Rings was the design of the Hobbits, but more specifically, he had to make sure that the Hobbits were the right height. So how did he do that? Well, Jackson used a method called forced perspective to make it look like one actor was bigger than the other. It goes without saying that this effect was very useful for the Lord of the Rings series, even in the Rings of Power series. Since forced perspective usually depends on very specific camera angles, the camera crew used moving sets that moved in real time with the camera, keeping the same sense of perspective throughout the shot. When hobbits didn't have to interact directly with bigger characters in a scene, they were shot separately and then put back together in post-production. Truly a master class by Peter Jackson. With that being said, that's all from my end on movie scenes you thought used CGI but were completely real.